The career of director Steven Spielberg is filled with massive critical and commercial hits that span more than half a century. From Jaws to Indiana Jones to Jurassic Park to West Side Story, reshaping the film landscape over and over again. But there are so many films that Spielberg attempted to make, but never got in front of the camera. And there are a few that are as fascinating and secretly influential as Night Skies, a sci-fi horror film focused on a rural family attacked by aliens over the course of one terrifying night. It's Close Encounters without the wonder. It's E.T. without the warmth. It's Poltergeist, but sci-fi instead of supernatural. And it will never make it onto film. So what would Night Skies have been if it had been made? How did its cancellation lead to the creation of both E.T. and Poltergeist? And what lingering influences did this unmade sci-fi horror have on Spielberg's career? Including another unmade sci-fi horror in the form of an incredibly dark sequel to E.T. that never came to be. This is the story of Steven Spielberg's Night Skies. From its real-life inspiration, to its script, to its ultimate cancellation, that changed the career of one of the most successful film directors of all time. The story of Night Skies begins back on August 21st, 1955, with what has come to be known as the Kelly-Hopkinsville encounter. That evening in the small town of Hopkinsville, Kentucky, two families, the Suttons and the Taylors, barricaded themselves inside a farmhouse to hold off a small alien invasion. At first, the families, gathered for a dinner together, saw lights in the sky they later claimed were UFOs, before seeing strange creatures come in from the woods and chase them back to the home they were staying at. For more than 4 hours, the families, consisting of 5 adults and 7 children, held off multiple short, dark figures that tried to break in through the home's doors and windows, firing at them and eventually fleeing to the local police station. The family's pleas caused citizens, police, and military officers to come back with them and search for what may have been attacking the family. However, nothing was found except for a luminous green glow left on a fence, causing the authorities to leave, only for the creatures to return around 3:30 a.m. once again, crawling all over the house. The families promptly left the farm in the morning. And in the time since, the Kelly-Hopkinsville encounter has only grown in the ufology community. Was it really aliens? Did panic cause the families to mistake owls for extraterrestrials? In any case, the story eventually made its way to Steven Spielberg, told to him by ufologist Joseph Allen Hynek while working on Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Released in 1977 to massive acclaim and success, Close Encounters was Spielberg's big follow-up to Jaws, solidifying his place in Hollywood as not just an immensely talented filmmaker, but one whose movies coined the term blockbuster. Spielberg had a passion for UFO stories ever since he was a young boy, directing a feature-length home movie called Firelight when he was 17, writing an alien encounter short story, Experiences, considering a documentary on those with their own UFO stories, and eventually making Close Encounters. Close Encounters was originally titled Watch the Skies, an homage to The Thing from Another World, and was Spielberg's passion project, delayed by Jaws and eventually written by Spielberg after working with Paul Schrader on a failed draft. It's a movie that balances the fear and fascination of those who witness multiple UFO encounters with the government's research into escalating alien visitations. And despite its risky production, which was advised against by the US government, it was a hit. Producer Columbia Pictures wanted a sequel made fast, but Steven, who had refused to make a sequel to Jaws, was also hesitant to make another Close Encounters. Instead, spurred on by the Kelly-Hopkinsville encounter story told to him by Hynek, he soon began work on a story treatment titled, once again, Watch the Skies, this time inspired by the 1955 farmhouse incident. With Spielberg quickly off to work on 1941 and then Raiders of the Lost Ark, the director hired John Sayles, who had just written Piranha for Roger Corman and Joe Dante, to turn the treatment into a script. Okay, enough with the background, let's get on to the movie. Night Skies takes place somewhere in the Midwest United States and focuses on a family of 6. Father Ed, mother Ruth, Ed's mother Graham, daughter Tess in her late teens, younger teenage brother Watt, and 10-year-old Jaybird, who has special needs and is nonverbal. Tess had been accepted to go to a music school, but decided to stay to take care of Jaybird and is essentially his mother figure. with Ed too busy taking care of their farm and Ruth just kind of a checked-out mom. Sayles' script immediately opens with its attention placed on the vast, remote land that the story takes place in, and draws our attention to the nature of predator and prey by focusing on a hawk snatching up a mouse and flying away, before we meet our family, who, in this version of the script, doesn't have a last name. But the calm heartland life is quickly disrupted by the discovery of several gruesome cattle mutilations. A strange series of killings that's been going on for a while, and whose description shows us that this won't be a family-friendly film, and will push into the horrific. The skin on its neck, from shoulders to chin, has been skillfully removed, leaving the membrane and nerves beneath intact. A perfect circle of skin about the circumference of a grapefruit has been removed from its forehead. Its genitals have been sliced out. The investigation brings us to our other major characters, Sheriff Love and his son Vaughn, who soon sparks up an old romance with Tess as he's on break from college and back in town. We also encounter some Air Force investigators who have arrived due to the disturbance and learn that these cow deaths have been happening for a while. But what is it? Some pin the blame on supposed black magic practitioners from Missoula, Montana. Ed says the mutilations are from agribusiness trying to scare out the little farmers to take over. Meanwhile, Watt has read magazines about cattle mutilations and alien abductions, saying these UFOs are from the Dog Star. Of course, you know he's no good because he reads Heavy Metal magazine. Toss that shit, kid. Don't you know comic books rot your brain? And if you've seen Spielberg's other work from this time, you can see how closely interrelated Night Skies would have been. The remote location and ominous sightings, along with a government cover-up, feel like Close Encounters' first half, while an early scene with interplay between the kids and parents kind of being rude to each other is a lot like Poltergeist. Our first encounter here happens about 20 minutes into the film, when Watt is out fixing a post, alone in the farmland, as a dark red-tinged cloud parks itself overhead. As Watt tries to leave, the cloud keeps pace with him, hanging low at treetop level until flashing a white light on him. And when he tries to drive off in his pickup, the truck is, of course, completely dead. It's a pretty classic alien abduction scene you've seen in countless movies and TV shows, but the spaceship leaves just as the tension is boiling over. For now. On the family drama front, the real conflict is over Ed's decision to send Jaybird to a state home for care, which Tess is completely against. She's his caretaker. Meanwhile, Mom Ruth reveals her religious convictions by saying, "The Lord willed him to be the way he is. The Lord will send us guidance." And Watt's return to the farmhouse and news of a UFO encounter is, of course, not believed by his parents. The presence of the aliens is often illustrated by other things reacting to them. Power lines that start humming super loud, chickens in the roost that pick up on their noises, and Jaybird, who seems to be able to hear their communications. Most of the first act is focused on the family relationships and their daily routines on the farm, with little snatches of alien activity throughout, including a POV tracking shot that moves 3 feet off the ground, with Sayles' script discussing if the shot should be infrared, black and white, segmented, or something else to show the audience that they're behind the eyes of an ET, which is specifically identified as such in the script. More on that later. Vaughn and Tess also have a sex scene in the woods that's crept on by an alien. It's a lot more mature than what you'd expect from most Spielberg films in the 80s, and has some slasher feel to it as well. It's almost a Friday the 13th scene. It just stops short of having our couple get attacked. With night fully set in the heartland, Vaughn and Tess go up to a bluff overlooking the valley and see lights in the orchard of a neighboring family, driving over to investigate only for the car to die. Suddenly, a spaceship twirls and lifts off behind the trees, and in its wake is a phosphorescent glow and a bewildered old man in the clearing with strawberry marks on his arms and shoulders. He doesn't make any sense and talks about angels and reapers. While Tess is telling the family what they saw, Jaybird and his cat Fritz leave the house and wander the fields, with a hidden ship suddenly appearing and tracking them. It's a pretty effective scene, even when existing as just a few short paragraphs, as we're immediately worried for Jaybird and are struck by the realization that these ships are so stealthy that they could be anywhere at any time. Here, the ship is only described as a stable red light and a white one spinning around it. Reaching the midpoint of Night Skies, the story has worked to keep its threat in the background, building tension and making us question the true nature of these aliens. The UFOs of Close Encounters, after all, are peaceful aliens we struggle to understand. But with darkness fallen and our characters at their most vulnerable, Night Skies begins to shift into home invasion abduction. John Sayles only completed one 99-page draft of his script, which is the story I'm detailing for you here, and that you can read for yourself through the links below. And although there are several weaknesses to the draft, the character relationships could be so much stronger. The film lacks real themes that could be lived out through the alien encounter, and the climax has too much of a stop-and-start rhythm. These are clearly first draft problems. However, the film never got beyond that, and I think it's largely due to a matter of timing, as the draft was completed and sent to Spielberg while he was filming Raiders of the Lost Ark. Throughout the production of Raiders, I was in between killing Nazis and blowing up flying wings and having Harrison Ford in all this high-serialized adventure, said Spielberg. I was sitting there in the middle of Tunisia, scratching my head and saying, I've got to get back to the tranquility, or at least the spirituality, of Close Encounters. So Night Skies, with its darker edge and a story that's more focused on the nightmare of alien encounters rather than the wonder, was simply the opposite of what the director wanted at the time. And although Spielberg briefly considered hiring Texas Chainsaw Massacre director Tobe Hooper to make the film, then production designer Ron Cobb, plans went in a completely different direction when he read the Night Skies script to friend and screenwriter Melissa Matheson. Cobb was unhappy with losing the chance to direct, but he wasn't the only one mad about the change in direction. Special effects artist Rick Baker had spent $700,000 on creating alien prototypes for Night Skies, under the assumption that it would be made for Columbia. Baker's alien prototypes are pretty cool. There's a lot of intricate, lifelike work done on what is a pretty typical take on your gray aliens, with goat-like eyes, squat faces, and elongated bodies that Baker has since suggested were ripped off to make the ET design. I was working weekends and long nights to do this stuff, said Baker. Then he walks in one day and says something like, guess what? I'm not going to make this movie anymore. My jaw dropped. My heart skipped a beat. I almost felt like crying. Then he said, but I am going to make another picture which is going to have an alien in it. A cuter alien. A nicer alien. And I want you to start redesigning him. That ultimately proved not to be the case. Baker's conflicts with Spielberg over the cancellation led to Close Encounters effects artist Carlo Rambaldi, who also made the big animatronic monkey for Dino De Laurentiis' King Kong that I previously talked about, making the effects for E.T. And the warm-hearted healing of E.T. couldn't be further from where Night Skies goes in its second half. With Tess back home and Vaughn back with his father, Night Skies begins to ramp up its tension. First, the house's power goes out, and then we start to hear strange things all around, including the family dog Kelso growling and barking outside, then disappearing. Family dogs have terrible luck during alien invasions. There's a great tense scene as Ed and Water outside to investigate the cattle pens, while Jaybird is playing with marbles inside, and something is pushing through the cat door to get to Jay, as the family cat, Fritz, watches. It's around this time that our ETs really start to make their presence known, and Sayles' script gives each of them a name. There's Scar, the vicious leader of the group, whose hand can get red hot and melt glass to break in and has razor-sharp claws. Buddy, a friendly member who is interested in Jaybird. Hoodoo, who at one point imitates Kelso to get Watt to open the front door. Squirt, a tiny one who's more mischievous than dangerous. And Clud, who runs around and over the house. However, the aliens are never described in much detail beyond having long arms and giant glowing yellow eyes, leaving it up to Spielberg and his team to design them. And just as the family comes face to face with the aliens, and Jaybird begins finger-painting a celestial map with Buddy, the invasion is stopped by Sheriff Love, his deputy, and Vaughn arriving to see what's going on. But they soon leave, and with them gone, the family dips in and out of being idiots in a slasher movie. Just a few minutes after the invasion is over, Watt is looking at Hustler in a secluded barn, Tess is taking a bath, Ruth is watching TV, and almost immediately, the aliens are back. And this is where I think Sayles' script becomes afraid to fully push into horror, and its indecision hurts the effectiveness of the story. Little Squirt is eating food in the pantry and Graham fights him with a broom. Silly with no danger. Hoodoo is telepathically communicating with Ruth. Ominous and psychological. Buddy is in the clothes hamper next to Tess in the bath. Threatening but eventually harmless. And Ed finds Scar eviscerating a horse and eating it. A very scary scene that results in Scar telepathically controlling the last living horse in the barn to kick Ed and knock him out. These alien encounters are sorta half horror, half comedy, and it could really depend on how Spielberg directed it. It also shows that these aliens are sorta like apes and how they change from playful to aggressive, with Hoodoo giving Ruth an ominous telepathic warning that the film never follows up on. He said to me, he didn't talk, but his thoughts spoke to mine. He said we were being warned that things were out of hand, and something awful would happen if we didn't act better. And this is where the film reaches a two-part climax as the family barricades themselves into the kitchen, only to realize the aliens are barricading them in too, followed by their spaceship attacking with a bright white light that breaks windows and boards, as tentacle tubes snake inside to shock them and separate the family members. Jaybird, influenced by the aliens, finally runs out of the house and into the night with Hoodoo and Cludd, as Watt takes off on horseback to get help. In easily the scariest and most disturbing scene, Jaybird lies on the grass surrounded by Scar, Hoodoo, Cludd, and Squirt in a ritual as Hoodoo cuts a circle into Jaybird's forehead and one over his heart. Thankfully, Buddy arrives and fights Scar before he can do whatever the plan was to Jaybird, which was obviously a horrifying evisceration, and they have a bloody and brutal fight. Eventually, Tess is able to get Jaybird to come back by playing the piano as loud as possible outside. Watt is chased by a UFO on horseback, and Buddy is chased off by the ETs after the fight. The reunited family hides in the tractor shed as the ETs close in, and the UFO tentacles rip open the roof. But just as they're surrounded, the aliens are scared off by the arrival of another group of ETs, described as a different breed of ET. This one, tall and cypress-shaped, faced them in the yard. It has eyes and a nose but no mouth. Behind it, standing still up in the air, is a huge metallic ship. The Cypress alien puts his hand on Jaybird and is able to speak through him, saying, "I am come. There has been a hurting. There has been a hurting. This place, there has been. This is a sorrow. A sorrow. Many of us, not you. Many, many kinds. A sorrow. This is not again. We are seeing. This is, hurting is not again. This is needed. We are many, not you. We watch. We take. We take. We know you. Across time we know you. Across time we watch. We take. This hurting is not again. You again are alone. Alone from not you. Across time you will know." Jaybird silently asks the alien for one more thing, who then speaks through him one more time to tell each of the family members, he loves you. And that's all the information we ever get about the aliens before they leave. The next morning, Tess is packing up and going to school after all. Jaybird is still his unresponsive self, now drawing celestial maps and circuits, and the family, shaken by their encounter, is moving forward with their lives together. The movie ends with the hawk flying once again, as we see that Buddy is traveling across the open prairie, alone as the camera pulls back into an aerial shot until he's a tiny dot. A solitary stranger in a strange land. It's a solid script, but one that leaves a lot to be desired, especially as its climax depends on a deus ex machina, and our characters don't really have a true arc that's influenced by the events. However, when Spielberg read the script to Melissa Matheson, who had already written the Boy and His Horse script for The Black Stallion, she was moved in particular by the tender relationship between Buddy and Jaybird. The result was the Spielberg and Matheson co-written screenplay, E.T. and Me, eventually changed to E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Beyond sharing the naming convention in Sayles' script, E.T. takes the focus on a damaged family much further and centers the boy and his alien relationship, instead of it being just one part of a larger ensemble. You could easily see the earth-marooned Buddy walking right into the story of E.T. Meanwhile, the idea of a family in their home under attack by strange forces was shifted into the haunted house story of Poltergeist, with Spielberg hiring Tobe Hooper to direct and heavily involved in the process while directing E.T. And yes, Hooper actually directed the movie. You can watch my video about that. For Spielberg, the blend of love and terror experienced by a family in Night Skies, a mix I don't think fully works in this first draft, was split into two poles with E.T. and Poltergeist, both coming out in the summer of 1982 and dominating the box office. Poltergeist is what I fear, and E.T. is what I love, said Spielberg. One is about suburban evil, and the other is about suburban good. Poltergeist is the darker side of my nature. It's me when I was scaring my younger sisters half to death when they were growing up. As for those little gremlins terrorizing a family, they'd get another chance on screen in, well, Gremlins. Premiering in 1984 and executive produced by Spielberg. As for Sayles, he went on to have a prolific career writing movies like Alligator and The Howling and directing more than a dozen films, citing Night Skies as a jumping-off point for the films that followed and admiring Matheson's work on E.T. But the biggest spiritual successor to the film came in the form of yet another unmade Spielberg movie, an infamous one that never got beyond the story treatment stage. E.T. 2, Nocturnal Fears. Look, I know that sounds like I made it up for a joke, but it's very real. All that exists is a 10-page story treatment by Spielberg and Matheson, picking up months later during the summer with Elliot and friends still missing E.T. Like the first movie, a ship lands in the forest with a waddling alien peeking out. But this is not going to be the same happy experience. The treatment describes the creatures like this. The aliens on board are evil. They have landed on Earth in response to distress signals designating its present coordinates. These aliens are searching for a stranded extraterrestrial named Zrek, who is sending a call for help. The evil creatures are carnivorous. Their leader, Coral, commands his crew to disperse into the forest to acquire food. This turns out to be an albino fraction mutation of the same civilization as E.T., with razor-sharp fangs, daggers, and a hypnotic hum that paralyzes wildlife for their hunt. The two separate groups have been at war for decades, and their ship has cages and cages full of plant and animal beasts captured on their voyage. Zrek, as you probably guessed, is our beloved E.T., whose communicator is bolted to Elliot's roof and still sending out signals. Much like Night Skies, there are numerous reports of cattle mutilations, and the evil aliens' pursuit of Zrek leads them to taking Elliot and the kids on board their ship and interrogating them about their connection. Elliot is tortured by the aliens and blacks out from the pain while crying for E.T. Jesus, man. The climax has Elliot all beat to shit and caged, but rescued by a returning E.T., who has a heartfelt reunion with his friends after scaring off the evil aliens. E.T.'s mothership lands, and he leaves again, presumably after about 10 minutes of screen time and never to be seen again. Okay, this is a terrible story, and I think that was pretty obvious to Spielberg, who never moved forward with it. Films like Jaws, Jurassic Park, Duel, and War of the Worlds show that Spielberg can embrace horror and get appropriately mean with his scariest stories. If Night Skies had been made, I'm sure that Spielberg would have been able to really squeeze as much terror out of it as he could. But to turn E.T., a beloved family film that, while scary at times, has an innate sweetness to it, into a horror movie where twisted versions of our kind alien torment Elliot and friends, feels like it would have been a disaster with audiences. Imagine being a kid excited to see another E.T. film, only to spend 90 minutes terrified as carnivorous monsters from space chase down your favorite characters, all the while wondering just where the fuck E.T. actually was. Instead, Steve got his mean side out for Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, a similarly minded dark sequel to a blockbuster classic. But Indy already had a streak of darkness to it, making that jump to a mean and bloody second story much easier to swallow than this. Still, Temple of Doom wasn't well received by fans at the time, who balked at its darkness. But just imagine how much worse the reception would have been to this. Together, these films represent two major what-ifs in the career of Steven Spielberg. If Night Skies had been made, we likely would have never gotten E.T. or Poltergeist. If Nocturnal Fears had been made, there probably would have been no Temple of Doom. And while it's possible that Night Skies could have been a beloved film, I'm glad it remained a what-if for what we got in return. Thanks for watching today's video, and the first Unmade Films video I've done in quite a while. In the past, I've done a lot of videos on unmade sequels to franchises like Godzilla, Friday the 13th, and Nightmare on Elm Street, but I've also done a video on George Romero's unmade adaptation of Resident Evil, which is a lot more like what this video is. So if you like this video, go check that one out. I really enjoyed making this video because it gave me the chance to actually read the Night Skies script, which I'd been meaning to do for quite a while, as well as the story treatment for E.T. 2. which is kinda infamous online for just how bad of an idea that actually is. Still, they are very interesting what-ifs in the career of Steven Spielberg, who has many films that he almost made. But of all of those, I find these two movies to be the most interesting. And I hope that you did too. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Night Skies and whether you would have actually wanted to see this movie made, as well as your thoughts on the sci-fi films of Steven Spielberg, which include Close Encounters, E.T., War of the Worlds, Minority Report, and maybe Jurassic Park. Spielberg has done a lot of different types of movies, but I feel like his sci-fi work is some of his most interesting. As always, a huge thank you to my patrons and YouTube members for their continued support. And you can be a member or patron for only $2 a month, which gives you early access to every video and exclusive reviews, with my latest one being an extended review of David Lynch's Dune. So until next time, I hope that you're taking care of yourselves and watching the skies.